So in this third session, working with this acrylic tonal painting of this still life copy, we're going to be working mostly with the bird in the foreground. So this sort of cropped swan, I think it is. And it's pretty well established from the previous few sessions. Things are starting to look nice. I'm going to leave the background because I just want to develop the level of detail, the level of finish we want in this foreground area to a reasonable degree today. We'll be working on the background next week, possibly pushing it to a finish. We'll see how things develop. But I'm going to mostly just sort of work my way primarily across sort of left to right, keeping my hand obviously a bit drier, well, working kind of wet there to dry on this side. It doesn't matter so much because we're working in sorry, just clean my brush, in acrylics. Obviously if we were working in oil paint, it would be more important, but we are working with open acrylics, or I'm using open acrylics for mine, which means that you do kind of need them to be reasonably, or you don't want to kind of rest your hand on them just after you painted them, basically. You can see I'm using a smaller brush now, so I'm just going to start with a smaller brush and thinking about the form. So I'm trying to get the form to feel like it's turning sufficiently, and I'm also thinking about the sort of outside edge, so where it's harder or where it's softer. Some parts of the edge of the bird are softer than others. And then sort of gradually building sort of lighter tones. So you can see I'm using much smaller brush strokes, and more detailed little brush strokes, trying to use more transitions, which is trickier in acrylic than in oil paint. Obviously in oil paint we have the advantage of the fact the paint doesn't generally dry at all within a single session, whereas here it's already becoming sticky as I work. So you can sort of obviously spray your paints. I find usually just kind of dipping a little bit of water in, kind of adding a little bit of medium, which is, in this case I'm just using water. Helps keep things moving. But there are lots of advantages to that quick drying as well. So we just sort of work with the strengths of the medium. It's nice that you can kind of allow it, sort of, if you don't paint for a few moments, you can sort of let it set a bit, then go back and rework it. Whereas with oil paint, it's a lot trickier to be able to do that, more difficult. So making much more minor adjustments, as you can see today. And that's about the level of detail you want to shift to by the time you've got this much, or as much as I've got established already in place. There's a certain sheen to the bird that I really want to capture. That's extremely well painted in the original. So particularly anything that sort of draws you to, so there was certainly something that drew me to this painting as a copy in the first place. When you're working on your own copies, try to really figure out how it is that the artist managed to do that. Whatever it is that you really like about it, that's what you really take away from these sorts of exercises. For me in this piece, the two different types of sheen, so it's very texturally driven, but there's a certain sheen to the, well, obviously a very strong sheen to the pot in the background because it's a sort of a brass in the original. And there's a different sort of sheen to the bird. It does shine slightly, and it's an interesting sort of kind of like a contrast complementary relationship that they have. One of the reasons Carlsen's so good to analyze, particularly for tonal paintings, is he has these really flat values. Things feel shiny, but they also feel flat at the same time. It's kind of a remarkable quality in his work. It's certainly something worth studying for us. And I think, at least what I'm finding with this piece, he achieves it through quite subtle shifts. Nothing's too dramatic. So this slight little shift back where this value just gets slightly darker right at the edge of the top of this chest of the bird, because the lightest portion is in here. Everything's turning, in terms of form, because it's all just white feathers, everything's rolling back into that point. Just going to bring in my slightly larger brush than I was using last week, just for these chest forms. Sometimes you don't want, if using too small a brush, it can get a little bit too dabby, which is not the most precise word, but that's how I describe what happens that's not so good. So you're sort of just kind of poking at the painting a little bit too much. Sometimes it's nice to get slightly bolder, larger sections painted all at the same time. Just going to skip back to this shape in here because I want to catch a little bit of a section of the bird there that's again, trying not to get too dabby, so a little bit too dabby in there. Bring this larger brush back into play. Then that's looking better. Could still do a little bit more clarification of exactly what's happening with these sort of kind of wrinklier bits, I suppose, where the neck's creased. That's a bit better. So we can pull back out to this central section again and just try to start placing more of these smaller, so these feathers really sort of glow out. It just gives a slight texture. That works well. It's more of a suggestion of the feathers than anything else, really. And that's what's really nice about the complexity of this piece. But there are some super complex bits like so these feathers sort of just ever so slightly round off sort of turn in that direction, and we're trying to capture that. I'm trying to avoid overdoing it because then it gets too dark, so it's just that balance between just enough of a suggestion of those feathers sort of crumpled into the chest so that they're there, but they don't look too dark, so they have to fit into the context of the big form modelling of this, the bird's chest. So we can drop down to this four feather now, or this sort of front of the wing as we see it as well, and do a similar thing there. So I'm trying to start to create the texture of those feathers. There's some places where the feathers sort of ruffled and captures a little bit more light. So I can pop some of those in. Up there as well. And then we want that, again, we want that form to sort of just turn down into the ground that it's resting on. So we want a few more complex transitions down into there. got these lighter tones in the center of the wing, and then again, as always, as the form turns away from the light, it starts to get darker. So again, looking at those feather textures, we're starting to get a better sense of how the forms are overlapping and building. I'm just going to work probably down to about this point today, and then we'll stop because we're kind of nearing time. And then next week we'll be working on the back wing, which will kind of classify as, even though it's part of this form, it's a bit more of a back element or background element. Work on that, work on the pot, the other backgrounds. And then probably, I imagine we'll have another session, won't quite get to a completion. Another session where we finish everything off, so do a sort of final passover. Anything that wasn't quite, or isn't quite working. Because we're just kind of generally trying to push forward, so each time you work, you want to kind of move it forward in some way. Gradually add detail, but only when you're sure about how everything's working. You don't want to add detail prematurely because it just makes your life a little bit more difficult. There's a few tiny, just a few little touches more, but that's pretty much it. Let's get these little white flecks in. Might need a little bit of reworking next time, or when we get back to the foreground. And then finally I'm just gonna give my bigger brush a little bit of a wipe off, and then just add a little bit more bulk or more whiteness to the lightest portions. I always find, because it's so, tends to be pretty transparent, acrylics, unless you're using really full bodied paints. So you do need to sort of add quite a few layers, a bit more like tempera almost, to really get the lighter portions to sing. But yeah, that's working a little bit better now. And yeah, so we'll leave it at that for today. Got quite a lot developed, which is good. This would be a good sort of level of finish to achieve as your sort of preliminary stage before we're getting to the very final editing of everything. But yeah, so we've got the bird kind of more nicely, neatly blocked in now. We'll be working on the kind of back side of the bird, or the back wing, and this pot in the next session. Yeah, that's it. As always, you can subscribe for keeping up to date with future videos and tutorials, and you can also click through to the OCAD website if you want to sign up for tuition from myself and other expert artists. But yeah, I'll see you guys soon.